When I was diagnosed, he told me, you will be on medication for the rest of your life. You will have this condition for the rest of your life. And that felt like a death sentence. And I really believed him. And he was just so black and white about it. But, I then later on took it upon myself to do my own research and, have found other ways to stay well and not have all these horrible side effects.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Pete Isaiah, and with me today I have Megan Pasierbek.
Yep.
Did I say that right?
Close enough.
Awesome. Okay, great. And Megan's come on the podcast today to share her story, her journey with having been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and then her healing journey with that. And so, I'm delighted to have you on the podcast. And I've worked for 30 years as a nurse, and I've worked in mental health, and it's definitely, I have a lot of compassion for people that are struggling with their mental health, and you spend a lot of my career, supporting people through those challenges. And so I'm really excited that you're here today to share your story, and it's a positive story, and I think the world needs more positive stories. So I'm really looking forward to hear yours. So thank you for driving down from the Gold Coast. And we're here in sunny Byron Bay today, and it's a perfect day to have a great conversation. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to share my story and get it out there, and hopefully it can help a lot of people.
Yeah, that's the reason I invite. One of the reasons I invited you on, because of how enthusiastic you sounded to share your story, and you, when you told me that you hadn't yet shared it, I thought, well, what a great opportunity to get your story and your message out there. And so, just a moment ago, we were talking about what your motivations are. And so, I'd just like to hear from you again. What motivates you to share your story and your struggle? And
well, I mean, just having my own journey, it's been lifelong with my mental health, but I want people to know my story because I have, first of all, went down the traditional path after I was diagnosed and took medications and took advice from a doctor, and it wasn't working for me, and it was never quite working. And then finding my own path with doing all this research myself and being able to, use supplementation and nutrition and lots of other things to help myself and heal myself. And so I'd like other people to know that there is another way if the way that they're trying, generally the traditional path of Western medicine, isn't working. But also with my journey, there's been a lot of times where it was really tough and I felt very isolated and I felt very alone and I felt very ashamed, and I very much for a long time felt a lot of the stigma with the diagnosis of bipolar, and I was so afraid to share it and I was so afraid of what other people would think. And I spent a lot of nights lying on my sofa bawling my eyes out because I felt so alone, and I'd like people to know that they're not alone in their struggle, and just to hear another perspective and hear someone else's story. If it helps them even a little, well, we've done our job.
Yeah, awesome. So with that, in regard to that stigma, that's a real thing that exists, and it's not just in the general public, it also exists within the healthcare industry itself. And, having worked as a nurse for 30 years, I've been in situations where even my colleagues stigmatise patients that have a mental health diagnosis, which is something that I found quite appalling. They will, respond to a patient without a mental health diagnosis differently than they do someone with a mental health diagnosis. There's this prejudice in there. And, I think we need to do better than that. And so that stigma that you felt, I mean, that's a real thing. You're not imagining that. And I think the healthcare system needs to acknowledge that and do a lot better. And that I wanted to also affirm the loneliness and the isolation that people struggling with mental health issues do feel. And so this is an opportunity to speak to that. Mm-hmm. And then I also heard you say that in your particular case that you went down the traditional path, but that didn't really work for you, and you were looking for alternatives to the traditional path. And that's part of your story, is that you're wanting to let people know, one, there is a stigma out there. 2, you're not alone, and 3, there are alternatives. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So, can I start by asking, when were you first diagnosed? At like what age?
I think I was 36, or I was turning 36 that year. 2019. So I was diagnosed. I had some quite severe depression at the beginning of 2019, and that went on for maybe 6 weeks. And it was a particularly bad episode. Normally, I've never really been one of those people where my depression has sort of kept me lying in bed all day or anything. I could just push through. It was as hard as it was. I would just push through and keep going and keep working, doing all the things. But that particular summer, I would find myself on the couch for 3 hours staring at a wall and had no thoughts, I felt like my brain was empty, which is also very uncommon. And then after 6 weeks of really struggling with that, I woke up one morning and I got up and I thought, I feel amazing after being extremely depressed the day before. And then I was like, oh, that's probably not normal. And then I started Googling things and I was like, maybe I have bipolar. And I found this website, Black Dog Institute, and I started reading about bipolar type 2, and there might have been, 12 symptoms of bipolar type 2 on there, and I think I might have counted I had 10 out of 12. And so I then went to the doctor, who then referred me on to a psychiatrist, where I had the diagnosis after that.
What were some of those symptoms? So for our audience who aren't really familiar with all the different symptoms of bipolar, or maybe not even familiar with the diagnosis of itself. So what out of can you remember what some of those symptoms were?
Sure. So one of the things with bipolar type 2 as opposed to type 1, it tends to be more characterized by periods of depression. I've definitely resonated with that. I've always struggled on and off my entire life, as long as I can remember, with depression. We don't have manic episodes. We have what they call hypomania, which is a lesser form. So you might have things like you can function on less sleep. You have lots of ideas, you're more creative, you're more talkative, you have more energy. I definitely resonated with that at times in my life. There's also a tendency to be, when you're hypomanic, very blunt. And I've had periods of my life where people have been like, Megan, I can't believe you said that. But I just, thought, oh, that's just me. I'm really blunt, but it wasn't all the time. And then obviously clinical depression, which some people don't know, but clinical depression and bipolar depression is no different. Like, it's the same symptoms, but you'll cycle through mood episodes. And I did notice there were times when I was depressed, and then there were times I was well, and then there were also times where, I felt amazing when I was experiencing the hypomanic states. And I could handle a lot more than usual. So at one point in my life, before I'd been diagnosed, I was working full-time in corporate. I had started studying interior design on the side, and then I was running a business and had 3 projects on the go at once. And I was still managing to do that, go to the gym every day and maintain a social life and a romantic relationship and feel fine and function on 4 hours sleep a night sometimes. So, that's probably not, I guess, the norm. So that was definitely something I identified with as well.
Yeah, so some of those things, not needing as much sleep, quite a lot of energy, feeling very creative, quite talkative, quite direct and blunt. I mean, they don't sound like problems to me. Actually, I kind of like most of those qualities and traits.
I think I remember when I was about 27 or something, I remember having a thought one day like, maybe I'm bipolar. And then I thought, oh no, but I like feeling like this, because I remember being hypomanic at the time. And I thought, well, I don't want that to go away. I don't want to go and take medication. And then that will take that away.
When you say hypermanic, what do you mean by that?
Hypomanic. So like the creativity, the functioning on little sleep, having all the energy to do all of the things, feeling on top of the world.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify something. So, and just so I'm also clear, but also the audience. So mania, in my understanding, is so there's mania and then there's hypomania. And so and hypomania is a more mild form of mania. And like I think hypomania is classified as 4 days, and not as severe mania. So like you say, needing less sleep, more energy, more creative, maybe flight of ideas, very talkative. Then if it gets more severe, it can last a week or so, and you can have like many sleepless nights. Then a really racing mind, a flight of ideas, grandiosity. It can even lead to like quite becoming like having hallucinations, hearing voices, and you're becoming quite disturbed in thinking. So that's like a full-blown mania. And then there's a hypomania, which is a mild version. So hypo means under. So hypomania means just under mania. Hyper means above. So that means above manic. So I'm not sure what
hypomania.
Hypo, right?
Yep.
Okay, right. So I'm glad I clarified that.
Yeah.
So hypomania is episode of mania or just hyper arousal, very stimulated, not needing much sleep, lots of energy, very creative, and a lot of artists love those qualities and traits and function very well in that hypomanic stage. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so you've never had a full blown manic episode.
Yeah, no, never.
Okay, but you said that you related to having depression as long as you can remember, like from a young child even?
I would say from about 6 or 7. Like I remember, obviously I didn't know what it was back then, but I remember there were times where I didn't want to get out of bed and I didn't want to go to school. And I remember being at school and I would watch the clock all day and I just would wish the time away. I just didn't want to be there. And I would just feel like really tired and just didn't want to engage or anything.
What was going on at school? Was it, was it that you were depressed that you didn't want to be at school, or was there something about school that you didn't want to be there?
I don't think so. I never really struggled at school, like academically. I always did really well. My teachers seemed to like me. Yeah, I don't really think it was school itself. I think it was just me, experiencing depression.
Okay, yeah. And so from the age of 6 or 7, you remember feeling low mood, down, not interested in school, didn't want to get out of bed.
And just would wish the time away.
Did your parents notice anything? Were they concerned about or mention anything to you about your mood from a young age? Or?
No, I remember my mum just like yelling at me and telling me to get out of bed. Like, you have to go to school. And I was like, but I don't want to. And she's like, you have to. She's like, if you don't go to school, we'll send you to a home to live.
Right, okay. So
like it was a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then you got out of bed and went to school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And okay, so all right. And so that's as a 6 or 7 year old. And then into your teenage years, did you continue to have episodes of depression?
Definitely, and they've definitely got more severe as I became a teenager, obviously with all the hormones and everything else that's going on. But I remember periods of time. I would come home from school often and I would get in my pajamas and go straight into bed after school. And I remember there were periods, like months at a time, where I'd just lie in bed and cry and cry and cry and cry. Like it would just go on all night. And needing lots of sleep, and quite a number of times. I grew up in the country and we had one school bus. So if you missed that one, you didn't get the other one to school. My school was like, my high school was about a 30-minute drive away in the next town. And I would sleep through my alarms. Sometimes I'd be, 10 hours sleep a night or sometimes more. And I'd just sleep right through my alarm. I wouldn't even hear it. And then I'd wake up and have missed a school bus. Like that used to happen quite frequently in my teenage years. And then into my 20s. And when I started working, I just could never figure out why I was so inconsistent, and it really frustrated me when I was depressed, because I knew what hypomania was, and I knew how energetic I could be and efficient I could be and how on I could be. Like I could just be so thinking 10 steps ahead, to then being the opposite, where your brain's not even working properly. Someone gives you instructions and 10 minutes later you've forgotten them, and not knowing why I was just struggling. It felt like some days walking through life, climbing a mountain, carrying 100 kilos on your back, like just everything felt like such an effort. And then again, my 20s, even my early 30s, like just struggling at work. And sometimes, just I'd come home from work sometimes and just go and get into bed because I had no energy left for anything. And the day was just such a struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you relate to having those bouts of depression through most of your life. And were you diagnosed with depression as a teenager or as in your early 20s?
No, my late teens, I went and saw a doctor because I knew something was wrong, and he put me on Zoloft, which I only took one, And then that day, the first day I took it, I had a car accident on the way to work, so I never took it again. I just hated the way it made me feel. So I never ever went back there. And people used to say sometimes, in my 20s, I had an awareness of my depression, but people used to say, well, go on medication. And maybe it was intuitive, but I was just like, I don't want to. Or maybe it was I had some stigma around it perhaps. But yeah, I just never wanted to go on antidepressants, so I just avoid them. And then in my mid-20s, I started exercising and eating better and taking better care of myself, and then I noticed how much better I felt. And, so naturally my mood episodes and my depression became less severe. So I just kept doing more of those things, and I had a real interest after that in nutrition and all those sorts of things, which I guess started me on like the journey I'm on now. But yeah, that certainly helped quite a lot.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a moment, like how you started to treat yourself. But I want to just go back a step to where, so was it 17 that you were prescribed Zoloft?
About 19, I think.
19, and that was by a GP?
No, they referred me to a psychiatrist.
Okay. So
and I just had maybe 2 sessions with him, and then he gave me some Zoloft.
Okay. And do you remember him diagnosing you with depression?
No, he didn't diagnose me. He literally got the Zoloft out of his cupboard.
Yes, okay. And he didn't say to you, you have depression?
No, he just asked me a whole bunch of questions.
Yes.
And we chatted and he just took notes.
Yep.
And I guess maybe at the time I was seeking some sort of therapy. I'd never had therapy before, but I remember being quite annoyed that he just took notes. I didn't feel like he cared. He was just very clinical, as psychiatrists are, but just was taking notes, and it was all very clinical and serious. And just got the Zoloft out of the cupboard and said, here you go, try this.
Try this. And what did he say? Did you have a follow-up appointment with him after you start? Because you only took it one time.
Yeah, I think I chose to not go back and see him after
that. You did? Okay, so you had 2 sessions with him, and he's got the Zoloft out of his cupboard and said, try this, and he's written you a prescription for Zoloft?
No, just
gave you some.
Yeah,
okay.
Just a freebie he got from the pharmacy.
All right, and then if that was going to work, then the idea was that he might write you a prescription for it, but you never went back and saw him.
No.
Okay, all right. And so did he mention anything to you about therapy?
No.
He didn't?
No.
Okay. It's interesting. I just want to I'm familiar with the therapeutic guidelines around prescribing antidepressants. And most antidepressants, I believe, are actually prescribed by GPs, not by psychiatrists. And the therapeutic guidelines say that they're only meant to be prescribed for 6 months and only in conjunction with therapy or counselling. And I don't think that's practiced that way. I think people can be prescribed antidepressants and not offered therapy, and I think that's not ideal. But generally, mental health conditions require, some talk therapy or some follow-up process other than just medication, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you took one Zoloft, nearly had a car accident, and haven't taken an antidepressant since?
No, I didn't ever take antidepressants after that, and I didn't actually, even when I was diagnosed bipolar, well, if you know anything about bipolar, you're generally not prescribed antidepressants because they can send you into a manic or hypomanic state. You're generally given a mood stabilizer or something, or an antipsychotic or something like that. So I never took antidepressants like ever again.
Right, and still aren't?
No.
And how's your depression?
I haven't had any episodes since January 2020.
Okay, that's great. So that's 3.5 years.
Yep.
Wow, no depression in 3.5 years, and having that's quite remarkable. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Look, you've shared with me under different circumstances a little bit about your past, so I'm a little bit familiar with your childhood, and I know that you shared about that you were belted or hit by both your parents, your mother and your father.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about your childhood or what it was like for you to be a child in your household? Or is that something you don't want to?
No, sure. I can touch on that. Sure. I grew up in a household with 2 very traumatized parents. Both of them grew up in very abusive homes with alcoholic fathers. My father was an alcoholic. And back at that generation, just a lot of them never dealt with their unresolved pain, and I got to be, I guess, the scapegoat for their unresolved pain, and was subject to a lot of physical and emotional abuse. Grew up with a lot of trauma and I've been on such a journey myself, not just with my mental health, but even just with healing a lot of that trauma. And for most of my life, I would say even up until a year ago, pretty much till I started, I guess, experimenting with plant medicine, but also some somatic practices and things like that, did I realize that I'd spent most of my life in fight or flight mode and just like was in hypervigilance all the time.
Was this because of how your parents treated you?
Yeah, I think
hypervigilant about,
Absolutely, yeah.
And so how would you get hit often or occasionally or?
Yeah, it was more emotional abuse, which was
Yeah.
I mean, really, I don't really have the memories of that are just, it's all a blur, but it was just almost daily. Like there was something I was being shamed for or yelled at or put down for or, in an attempt to control me.
Yeah.
Because my parents believed children should be seen and not heard. And so, they just wanted to control me, plus all their own trauma and unresolved pain, and then just their own imprinting, them just repeating patterns with no conscious awareness.
So both your parents would drink alcohol?
No, my dad.
Your dad?
Not my mum.
Your mum wouldn't, okay.
Yeah.
But they did both hit you at times?
Yeah.
And with their hands, with the belt, with the stick?
Yeah, their hands, with my mum with the wooden spoon, my dad with the belt. Like there was one time in particular, my dad with the belt, like I think it was like 30 times on the back of my bare legs. And like I do remember that being like very traumatic. Like I felt shell shocked the next day. And I feel like that was a particular trauma that just, like I've spoken about before when I've done like, I've spoken to you how I do internal family systems and parts work. And I felt like that was a trauma that kind of, in a way, a part of me broke that day, like just one of those really big T's.
Yeah. Yeah, so you got belted on the back of the legs with a leather strap by your father 30 times and it broke your spirit. Yeah, I've had a similar experience, and it was my mum that was dishing out the belting, and it was with a leather strap as well, and she got stuck into me one day, and I remember looking up at her and her eyes were rolling back in her head. So she was actually in some sort of trance, and when I saw that, I dissociated. I couldn't feel the pain of the belting anymore because I just went into my mind and out of my body. Yeah. That's a thing called dissociation. So, I've had similar experiences, and in some ways I felt like some of those early traumatic experiences did break my spirit a bit, but I got quite a strong spirit, and I can see that you do too.
Yeah.
So I think, so when you use the word trauma, I just want to open that conversation up a little bit, because I think some people think that trauma is something only people who go to war have, or people who have been raped, or people who have been in hurricanes or things like this, or natural disasters. But I think we need to really broaden the definition of trauma. And I think a child being belted by its parents is a traumatic experience.
Yeah, 100%.
So my expanded definition of trauma includes any unreconciled psychological wound or injury that you're incomplete or unresolved about. And so I think you shared with me that did your father punch you once in the face or something? Yeah, okay. Yeah. How old were you when you got punched or when you got belted on the back of the legs?
Maybe 8 or 9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very young, tender age, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm actually going to do a podcast on parents who belt their children, but we'll save that for another time because it's something that I'm quite passionate about. I think there's no reason for a parent to ever hit a child.
I completely agree.
Do you? I'm glad you agree with that.
I know I'm not a parent myself, and I know that I can't possibly understand from that perspective, but I just look at it like I look at children through a lens of compassion, and I just think, how could you hurt a little child?
Yeah.
Like it still boggles my mind.
I'm blown away by that too. And it's still legal in every state in Australia.
Is it?
Yeah, for a parent to hit their child.
I thought they changed the law a while ago. It was like if your parent couldn't leave a mark on you. So if there's any bruising or anything, that was then considered child abuse. But
well, if they hit you and don't leave a bruise, that it's not.
I don't know.
I know they definitely changed the law in schools.
Oh, right.
Like in schools, they're not allowed to hit you, but at home, your parents can hit you. I mean, if they do leave a bruise and a mark, then a police officer or a healthcare professional who sees a mark or a bruise is meant to investigate that and report that to Children's Services, I think it is. So parents can still hit you in the home, and I think that's crazy that we haven't reformed that law. There's probably parents out there that may be listening to this that totally disagree with me. And like you, I'm not a parent. But for me, it's like if you hit your child, you're teaching them that violence is acceptable. That's all you're teaching them.
Yeah.
You're not teaching them to be better behaved. You're teaching them that violence is an acceptable form of communication. But that's a whole other podcast. But thank you for at least being willing to share that part of your childhood, because I'm always looking for, is there something behind, our anxiety, our depression, our mental challenges, and in my case, definitely my childhood experiences contributed to that.
Yes.
So, okay, so have you taken any other medications for bipolar type 2 other than that one Zoloft?
Yep. So when I was first diagnosed, I was put on a medication. I've probably taken, I think, 4 different medications. The first one was a drug called Lamictal. It was originally designed for or made for people with epilepsy, but they had found that it had helped people with mood disorders. So I started taking that, and I did feel good in the beginning. One of the side effects, unfortunately, is that it can cause a life-threatening rash. And I started taking the medication, and 2 weeks later was going on a trip to Europe. I got to Europe 4 days after I'd arrived in Europe. I developed this rash. And I was like, oh boy, like what is happening? And I wasn't sure what to do. Like, do I stop taking it? Do I not? I eventually managed to get on the phone to my psychiatrist, and he just said, just stop taking it immediately, which I did. Then came back to Australia, tried another medication. It didn't work. So after 6 weeks, tried another one. It didn't work. And it was just making me feel awful. Like the side effects are so awful. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I chose to stop taking medication, which we can get to later. And then eventually I was on this medication. It was awful. I felt like I couldn't even move my legs properly. Like even to get up in the morning, go to the gym was such a struggle. And I felt so drowsy some days. At the time I was studying, I felt like I couldn't even go to class at uni. And then I went on a trip to India. I got back. I was still on this medication, and I sunk into the worst depressive episode of my life. It was just so awful. And with depression, and a lot of people can probably identify with this, with depression, I've always had times of suicidal ideation, but never actually wanted to act on it. But this depression was so bad, I said to my partner at the time, I think I need to go to hospital. I actually want to kill myself. And I just I didn't know what to do. So we tried to get in, but I couldn't. It was like January, my psychiatrist was on leave. I eventually got in to see his colleague about 3 days later, and I was thinking, my gosh, like imagine if I was in a crisis situation with no support around me and really did want to kill myself. Like imagine, like there's just such an issue with the system itself. But I got in to see this other psychiatrist. She prescribed me lithium, which was very helpful, but I won't say it fixed me. It did lessen my symptoms. But it took me a good 6 weeks to still come out of the depressive episode. And during that time, COVID had hit. And while I was taking the lithium and still going to uni and all those sorts of things, I was going out to uni and no one knew what COVID was at the time or what was going on. But I would hope and pray every single day. When I'd go to uni, I used to think, I hope I get COVID and I die. Like, wow, okay. That's how I felt. It was such a struggle. I would get home from uni some days at 3 p.m. and I'd just go and get into bed. Like I was really struggling at that time. But then I came out of that and I became well, and I stayed well for like a whole year. And then in January 2021, my ex-partner and I decided that we were going to try to conceive. So I went off lithium because you can't be on lithium when you're trying to conceive. It can cause heart defects in babies. And by pure fluke, maybe not fluke, the universe, I was on Audible that week that I was going off my medication, and I happened to come across a book called Med-Free Bipolar. And it's written by a woman in America who claims she had such severe bipolar, she had delusions, she had schizophrenic tendencies. She'd ended up nearly losing everything, her job, her husband, her life, ended up in public housing, couldn't even function, was still on 4 different antipsychotics. and claims to have cured herself of her bipolar and has been well for the last 10 years through supplementation and the right nutrition. And I figured before I'd even read the book, I just saw the title and thought, well, this sounds interesting. It's worth a read. So I listened to the Audible book. I wrote down a list of things that she'd recommended. I took them to my naturopath. My naturopath said, yeah, we'll pop you on these supplements, maybe not these. So I started those in January 2021. And I've been not just well since, I would say like I've been thriving. And it's really cool to reflect on that not only have I been able to keep myself well with supplements, I'm not on medication, so I'm not having to experience those horrible side effects.
Yeah.
Lithium was great, but it also made me feel like I was wearing a veil through life. I wouldn't experience the bad stuff, but you didn't experience the joy and the good stuff of life either. I also would feel quite like sick sometimes, like nauseous. And I had to have blood tests every 6 months to make sure I didn't have liver toxicity. So it's been really cool to be on these supplements and be thriving on them, but also to be experiencing the full spectrum of emotions in life, have no episodes. And yeah, like just now I have not just that I'm well, but I also have a confidence in myself that I didn't have before. Like I was so afraid when I was first diagnosed that even if I was well, that this beast of a diagnosis could just come back and, you know, push me under again, you know, with depression. But I feel like I can handle anything that, you know, life throws at me now. And I know that I can keep myself well. And I still stay on top of it. I still do all these other things. I eat really well. I have blood tests every 6 to 12 months or other tests just to make sure that my nutrition is right and I don't have any levels of things that are too high, too low, because it's really important to do that. The main premise of that book, Med-Free Bipolar, and she does speak about it being, she calls it the med-free method. And it's not just good for people with bipolar, but for people with other diagnoses like ADHD, anxiety, OCD, schizophrenia, because the way she likens it is that the brain is like a baby. So when a woman is pregnant with a baby, that baby will take all the nutrients from the mother. If the mother's not eating enough or not getting the right nutrition, it will then strip the nutrients from her blood, her teeth, her bones. When that baby then becomes earthside, the baby's going to cry, the baby's going to act out to tell you it's hungry. And she says the brain is exactly the same. And if the brain is not being nourished and getting the nutritional requirements it needs, it's going to become inflamed and then it's going to act out. And that's why she's discovered this method and been able to, you know, cure herself of all these symptoms by nourishing herself. But it's also about your gut health, and with, you know, the gut being the second brain, that's not a new thing. I think Hippocrates said all disease begins in the gut. And interestingly, what I learnt in this book about medication is that most antipsychotics and lithium, they're actually bound in HCl. HCl is the main component in your gastric acid in your stomach. And they're bound in HCl, so your stomach will actually digest them. But she's arguing in this book that perhaps it's not the drug that's helping you. It's actually the HCl around the drug that is helping your body to better digest your food and extract the nutrients from your food properly. Like, yes, we can supplement, but you also need to make sure that your gut is absorbing those nutrients properly.
Yeah.
And at times I've taken HCl supplements. She also recommends, like, if you've got no money, no time, or just no resources, you can start using Himalayan pink salt, which helps to produce more HCl in your gut. It also has pink Himalayan salt is the most mineral-rich salt, and it also has trace elements or traces of lithium in it. It's from a rock.
Yeah.
People think lithium is a drug. It's actually
It's
not.
a salt.
It's a salt. It's a salt compound just like potassium. You can also get it from some veggies. Like I think the highest content veggies are like tomatoes, mushrooms, and kelp and cucumbers, I think, that have lithium in them.
Yeah.
You know, like there's so many things you can do.
Yeah. Look, that's awesome. And I want to get onto the book in a minute. And but I want to go back a step because you brought up suicidal thoughts. And I just wanted to, you know, out of it having a duty of care to be podcasting, you know, publicly, that I want to speak to that. And because this conversation, you know, may be listened to people and they may get triggered by the content of our conversation. And suicide is or suicidal thoughts can be quite disturbing and difficult for people to deal with. And so I just wanted to take a moment that if anybody's being triggered by our conversation today, and that they have those thoughts, that they know what to do with that. And so generally, if you're feeling that way, the two options, I think, if you really feel like you're going to harm yourself, is you call Lifeline. So Lifeline's a 24-hour phone service, and you can speak to a counsellor, trained person on the other end of the phone, who can support you through that time, or you present to the nearest emergency department. Because, you may regret, well, you wouldn't regret it because you wouldn't be around to regret it, but your family or other people may regret taking such drastic action. And a suicidal thought in the moment might seem like a good idea, but once those thoughts have passed, you could look back and go, well, I'm glad I didn't go through with that, yeah? So if people do feel suicide, and I think you did the right did you take yourself to the hospital? Or?
I couldn't actually get in, but by the time I'd kind of been able to see the psychiatrist, she said, do you still want a bed? I can get you one. And I said, I think I'm okay now.
Yeah.
It'd been 3 days. But I mean, I did have the right support around me.
Yeah.
And I know that that's not everybody's story. Some people don't have the support. Some people don't even have someone they can go to and say, I'm feeling this way.
Yes.
Or have someone else be able to even hold that energy or, not react to that and just, so a lot of people don't even want to say how they're feeling because they feel like I'm being a burden.
Yes. That's one of the biggest drivers for suicide is that people feel like they're a burden. And they don't want to burden others with what they see as their own troubles. And they don't want to burden their family or their partner. And that can be a contributor to actually following through on that. But yeah, so if this goes out to anybody, if you're feeling suicidal, call Lifeline or take yourself to the nearest emergency department and get the help and support you need. And I also just want to take a moment to be clear that I'm really open to your experience and your story, and I want to hear all about med-free bipolar. But I also want to be clear that this podcast or I myself am not advocating for that people stop taking their medications. Like people need to make their own responsible decisions around in conjunction with their healthcare provider. So I'm definitely happy to hear your story about med-free bipolar, and that may be, an option for some people or many people, and then it may not be for others. And we're so unique and diverse humans in how we respond not only to illness but also to treatment for illnesses. And so this may work wonderful for some people but not for others. And so we're not saying today everyone should jump off their bipolar medication. We're not saying that at all. So you on 4 different medications. You mentioned Lamictal and lithium, and then do you know the names of the other ones?
One was called Latuda and another one was called Zeldox, I think.
Okay. So generally speaking, I think the options are antipsychotics or atypical antipsychotics. You're saying not so much antidepressants for type 2. They don't normally prescribe antidepressants for type 2, is that what you're saying?
Or type 1 apparently can send you into mania because it's trying to take you back the other way.
Yep.
Personally, I had the worst time on antipsychotics. Like lithium isn't an antipsychotic.
No.
Neither is Lamictal.
No.
Lamictal was originally prescribed for people with epilepsy.
Yeah.
But the worst depressive episode I had in my life, I was on an antipsychotic.
Yeah. So the Lamictal, things like Epilum, which is sodium valproate, which is another kind of salt, they're mood stabilizers. They also work as anticonvulsants. Yeah, you were saying. So there's antipsychotics, atypical antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers are kind of the go-to. And the worst side effects you had was on the antipsychotic, and antipsychotics are known to have the largest number of side effects of any class of drugs. One of the antipsychotics, it's not used so much anymore, but it was called Largactil. Largactil came from large actions, meaning many different actions, and it was an interesting name that they called it. And that's a antipsychotic that produces horrible, side effects. So what side effects did you experience when you were on the antipsychotic?
One of them, which I think was Latuda, I was having a hypomanic episode, but I felt like it was more intense, and we just kept upping the dose and it wasn't doing anything. Like I remember going to uni and I messaged a friend. I have another friend who has been diagnosed with bipolar type 2. So at the time I was kind of chatting with her a lot because, you know, just it was like having some comfort there and her getting, and I remember sending her a message saying, I feel very silly today, like just really silly. And just like was laughing at everything, like everything I found humor in everything. So it didn't really do anything. And we got to a point where I think we'd up the dose 3 or 4 times. But at the time, that medication wasn't covered by Medicare. So it was getting to the point where if I had have continued, it was going to cost like $300 a month to be on this medication. So my psychiatrist said, well, we can't keep you on this. It's ridiculous. And then I went to, I think, Zeldox. And that made me feel like my muscles weren't working. I also felt incredibly drowsy. I felt like my brain wasn't working. I found it really hard to get out of bed in the morning. I also found it very hard to wake up. Like it would take me until like after lunchtime before I would feel like I'd woken up properly. Like I just felt incredibly drowsy and everything felt very hard. And even I felt like I know I was, but I felt like I wasn't even walking properly. Like I felt like my legs were I was almost dragging my feet or something.
Yeah, so that's they're called extrapyramidal side effects that you get with antipsychotics, and they do affect movement. And so you would have seen the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
No, I haven't actually.
Haven't you, with Jack Nicholson? This really impressed me early on in my nursing career. I worked in mental health wards, psychiatric wards, including locked wards for the criminally insane. And a lot of those people are dosed very heavily on antipsychotics. And they'll have a shuffling gait where they're just shuffling their feet along the floor. And they don't swing their arms back and forward. Their arms are just by their side. And they'll have like a fixed stare on their face and like a mask-like appearance where they don't show emotion. And then they'll be drooling.
Oh, my God.
And then like doing this like lip smacking. And all those, if you look at them, you think, oh, that person looks crazy.
Yeah.
But those are all symptoms of the medication to treat their mental illness. So all that shuffling gait, stiff appearance, fixed stare, drooling, not moving your arms when you're walking, that's how strong these antipsychotics are, how much they suppress the brain. And they're given, antipsychotics are generally given to suppress psychotic features. So a psychosis is when you lose touch with reality. And you may be paranoid, delusional, you may be seeing things, hearing voices, and you're not in touch with reality at all. And that's very disturbing and very distressing to have that experience, but to be around someone having that experience. And when you're psychotic, you can become a danger to yourself and others. And I've seen plenty of patients who have been in psychosis in my nursing career, and they give, in an acute setting like the emergency department, if someone comes in psychotic, nurses and doctors, we do give antipsychotics to suppress those psychotic features to keep the person safe. And those major tranquilizers is another name for antipsychotics. They actually put you under, like put you out, completely tranquilize you. And then sometimes people wake up after a long sleep and those psychotic features are gone. So I'm not advocating for or against the use of antipsychotics. I'm just saying that sometimes they're helpful in an acute setting to stop someone from hurting themselves or someone else. But taking them long term is problematic. And, many people with mental health diagnoses, schizophrenia, bipolar, the side effects of their medication are so problematic that most people eventually just stop taking their medication. And they may function without their medication or they may not, and they may find themselves hospitalised again. So yeah, the side effects of antipsychotic medications is the main reason people stop taking them. So it's a big problem. Do you stay on them? Do you get off them? And everybody's got to make that choice for themselves. And so you managed to stop taking antipsychotics. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were being prescribed those for hypomania.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you've never had a psychotic episode.
No.
Right.
No.
And so they thought they would trial you on those, and you were saying they didn't help.
No.
But they were definitely affecting your movement, your mood, your brain functioning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't feel good on them at all. Like they were just, it was awful. It just felt awful. And I remember that not feeling like I could move my legs properly. And I mean, I love to train at the gym, and being able to trying to go to the gym while you feel that way is so hard. And I took it upon myself to reduce my dose because I was like, I can't live like this. And I remember my psychiatrist he reminds me of like this really disapproving school teacher. Like he was very serious, raised his eyebrows at me. And he was so angry with me for reducing my dose. But I'm like, I literally can't function. And he was just like, well, I don't think it's very wise for you to reduce the dose yourself. You could become unwell. I'm like, what's the alternative? Like,
Yeah, what kind of unwell do you want to be?
yeah.
The unwell of the side effects, or the unwell of, dealing with mood fluctuations while you're not on it?
Yeah.
And you decided that you'd rather put up with the mood fluctuations than the side effects? Is that?
Well, just like I couldn't function like that physically or mentally, so I just reduced my dose. I was still taking something.
Yes.
But he wasn't the type of doctor where it was open for discussion. It was he knew best. And if I did anything like outside of that, he was very disapproving about it. And yeah, he was really straighty 180 and just wasn't impressed at all that I would do that. It's like, and I do believe that, I do agree with you, the sentiment that like, no, don't just go off your medication like that. Do your own research, work out what works for you. And I do think that medication absolutely has its place, and in crisis circumstances, absolutely. But I don't think it's like the cure-all. And antipsychotics long-term, it's not helpful a lot of the time. But this doctor, like when I was diagnosed, he told me, you will be on medication for the rest of your life. You will have this condition for the rest of your life. And like that felt like a death sentence. And I really believed him. And he was just so black and white about it. But, I then later on took it upon myself to do my own research and, have found other ways to stay well and not have all these horrible side effects.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard that many people have told me that doctors make those kind of claims to them. It's like, and I find that an appalling thing to say to somebody. I mean, they don't know the future. They don't have a crystal ball in front of them. Who are they to tell you what your future is? You're not going to them as a fortune teller. You're going to them for healthcare, right?
Yeah.
And then he's putting that thought in your head that you're going to be on medication for the rest of your life, and you've been medication free for at least
2.5 years.
2.5 years, yeah.
And
So he wasn't right, was he? He was
not at all.
He was inaccurate.
And not just that, those kinds of claims and that fortune telling, it also further makes people feel more isolated and more alone, and like there's like a death sentence.
So that contributes to poor mental health, being told that you've got this and you're going to have it all your life.
Contributes to more stigma.
Yeah,
I think absolutely.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, it wasn't a helpful comment, and if there's any doctors or psychiatrists listening to this, I would challenge you to defend that proposition of, reading your patients' futures. I don't think that's what you're being paid for. And, so, okay, so you were told you were going to be on those for the rest of your life. You're not on them. So tell me a bit about supplementation. So are you taking supplements currently? What sort of supplements are you taking?
I take a probiotic. I take magnesium. I take coenzyme Q10. I take a blend, a powder. It's like a whole bunch of different supplements, and it's called GI Revive, but it's, if you want to Google it, it's got zinc in it, it's got chamomile, it's got licorice, it's got like a whole bunch of stuff that's quite good for your gut and quite calming for your gut. I take L-glutamine.
Yep.
And I take a fish oil. But I do have blood tests done every 6 months, and I just see, like at the end of last year, I did blood tests and everything was great, but I had low vitamin D. So I took a vitamin D supplement for a while, and I always just monitor it. And I always just check in with myself, like, is there something, how am I feeling? Is there something I could be doing differently? I know what I could do to, like, make myself feel better. Often, you know, I might just have a morning where I'm feeling a bit anxious, and then I know all the things I need to do to make myself feel better. And most of those things, they're just little tweaks, but they work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously if that's going to be an ongoing problem, or I'm going to be feeling this on an ongoing basis, then I would look into it further. And I'm not so naive to say I've cured myself of bipolar. I know that it's possible. I could have a bout of depression again. I could have a bout of hypomania, but I monitor it every day, and I always check in with myself, and I have enough self-awareness to know, like, I'm not exempt. No one's exempt. Like, something could trigger me and I could have an episode, but I would seek the right support and do the right things to help myself.
Yeah. Yeah, so they don't know what causes bipolar. They don't know what causes schizophrenia. Mental health, psychiatry's like that's one area where it's all clinically diagnosed. Like there are no blood tests or brain scans that they can do really to diagnose these things. It's more on your clinical presentation, and there's no real cures as such. It's not like these are diseases that have cures. I think it's more like they're a syndrome of symptoms that may respond to medication or supplementation or lifestyle changes rather than a disease cure model.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so probiotics, magnesium, CoQ10, L-glutamine, so low vitamin D can contribute towards depression. Some of those other things are to support your central nervous system, but then you've got this GI Revive, so that's working on your gut. Now, I think 95% of our serotonin's produced in our gut. So, and this is your feel-good neurotransmitter. So the gut is responsible for producing neurotransmitters that improve mood in the brain. So you've looked at gut function, microbiome stuff to make sure that your gut's healthy.
Yeah.
Does that include diet? Like, I'm curious about your diet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what can you tell me about your diet?
Okay, I don't eat gluten. I'm celiac, but I gave up gluten 10 years ago, and I immediately felt better. I noticed a difference in my mood. This is well before I even knew I had bipolar. I obviously was aware I'd have depressive cycles, but yeah, instantly felt better. I noticed just such a shift in my mood, and I didn't have, like, I guess, crashes during my day. Like, you know, a lot of people get the 3 p.m. crash and they need a chocolate bar, or they get really cranky. I noticed that those things stopped happening. And there was just a lot of physical symptoms that went away. Like, I was always having joint pain, that went away. I was always feeling bloated, that went away. I lost 10 kilos within 3 months as soon as I stopped eating gluten. And when I was eating gluten, obviously when you're celiac, it damages your intestine and the part of your intestine that absorbs nutrients. So when I was eating gluten, I was always hungry, and it didn't matter how much I ate, I always still felt hungry, and I always still felt exhausted because I wasn't absorbing nutrients properly. But slowly I started to notice, like, I just felt a lot better. I stopped having that constant hunger went away. I stopped feeling so exhausted and lethargic all the time. I obviously lost a lot of weight. I started to, notice a difference in, like, I could lift heavier at the gym, and like, just my overall health improved so much.
Just by stopping gluten.
Yep, absolutely.
Interesting where you mentioned inflammation, because gluten can cause inflammation. But I'm wondering about the connection, and I've read about this, but I'm not a full bottle on it. But people talk about brain inflammation as being a cause of mental illness. And so I don't know enough about it, but I am curious about the inflammatory response and how that affects our nervous system and our mental health. So you stopped gluten. What other dietary changes did you make?
There was lots of things. I've tried lots of different things. Like, I have always treated myself like a science experiment.
Yeah.
Just you touching on, like, the gut and how inflammation can occur. There's 2 brilliant books I've read. I've read a million books, but there's a man called Dr. David Perlmutter, and he's actually a neurologist. And he discovered through his own patients and just experimenting that with gut health, he could improve his clients' conditions, so his patients' conditions. Things like, he claims to have cured his patients of symptoms of things like autism, MS, rheumatoid arthritis, like all these inflammatory diseases just through gut health. And he talks about things like, he's got 2 books one's called Brain Maker and one's called Grain Brain, and about how he believes that it's good to eat diets in high protein, high fat, and less like carbohydrates and less grains, because they can cause inflammation if we're eating them in excess. And hey, the standard Australian diet, we are. Like, you've seen a food pyramid, it's like, eat all the bread. Like, that's not always helpful. So things like that. And then obviously supplementation. I've worked with naturopaths on and off for years, and just probiotics, definitely I notice a difference when I stop taking them, or if I run out and I have a week in between. Like, I'll definitely notice how I feel. I don't eat much sugar. I don't drink alcohol. That was something I did in 2019. Like, I just gave up alcohol for a year because I wanted to set myself that kind of challenge, and I noticed how much better I felt.
Yep.
Also, sugar really affects me. And I try to stay away from dairy because I just don't process that very well, and just try and eat like whole foods really. That and things like little things like the Med-Free Bipolar book. She says, obviously, the pink salt that I touched on earlier, but even little things like have a glass of water 30 minutes before you eat, and then don't drink water while you're eating, because the 30 minutes before is going to help your stomach to start producing more of that HCl. And then you need your stomach acid to be at its strongest when you're eating, so you can extract the nutrients from your food. So you don't want to be then going and having water, because it's going to dilute it. Like little things like that, just little hacks. But mostly like whole foods, no sugar, no gluten. Try and stay away from the dairy, but cheese.
It's hard to give that up. Cheese has actually got casomorphine in it, so it's easy to get addicted to.
Yeah.
It's like morphine-like compounds in cheese.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I think the food pyramids, you should turn it upside down.
Agreed.
I've changed my diet quite radically in the last few years. I used to eat quite a lot of vegetables because I believed they were good for me, and maybe they are. Maybe they've got some vitamins and trace elements and minerals in them. But these days I'm mostly a carnivore. My diet's very high in protein and fat, and very low in carbohydrate. I eat a little bit of veg and a little bit of fruit. No sugar, no alcohol, and that really works for me. With a high fat diet, there's something around high fat diet that protects you from epilepsy, or some people. So with pediatric epilepsy, some children, they just switch them over to a ketogenic diet and they stop having seizures. So a ketogenic diet is one where you're burning fat for fuel instead of sugar. So it's a very low sugar, low carbohydrate diet. And so your body switches over to burning fat, which I think our body's designed to use fat as its fuel, not sugar. We didn't really eat a lot of sugar or carbs, I don't think, as we evolved. I think we ate mostly animal protein and fat. And when you eat fats and break them down for fuel, one of the byproducts of that metabolism are ketone bodies. And these ketone bodies are protective of the central nervous system. And so, I don't know a whole lot about this subject, but I believe that, switching to a low carb, low sugar diet and increasing fats, good fats, and protein in the diet is probably better for our brain and our central nervous system than this high sugar, high carbohydrate. I don't think we're meant to burn sugar as our main fuel.
Yeah. And I think just like for everybody, just, use yourself as your own science experiment. Like, tweak it a little bit, see what works for you. Like, I find full-blown keto isn't good for me. I can do it for maybe a week or two and then I start to not feel so good. So I don't do well with too much fat, but I don't do well with I do well with very low carb, but I still need some carbs, and that's sort of the balance for me. But everyone's different, and just see what works for you, do little tweaks. And I have another friend who's bipolar, and she went on keto for a year and she lost so much weight, and I've never seen her as well. That was the most well she's ever been consistently. And she doesn't do all the things I do. So I'm a bit of a nerd. But that really worked for her, the keto stuff. Yeah.
I like your point that everyone's different, and I think, as I was saying before, we all respond differently to physical conditions, medical conditions, complaints, and we also respond differently to the treatments. But the medical model seems to have like one size fits all. Oh, you're depressed? Everyone goes on an antidepressant. It's just a matter of which one.
Yeah. Which Band-Aid would you like?
Yeah, it's not looking at and I don't want to put all health professionals under the same umbrella because there's different levels of competence in any profession, and so some medical health professionals are a bit more by the book. Don't look into alternative things, and just it's a one size fits all. And I think there's limitations with that approach, and so I think that, like you say, you're willing to take responsibility for using yourself as your own experimenter and your body as a laboratory, and so you tried some things that they suggested, they didn't work for you. So then you looked around, what other alternatives do I have? And you tried some other things and found things that did work for you. And so changing your diet was one of those. Stopping alcohol was another. And now exercise, has that been an important part of your...
100%.
So say some more about that.
So when I was 25 maybe, 24 or 25, I had quite a severe back injury, and I was seeing an osteo, and it wasn't really getting better. I was seeing her every month and it wasn't really improving. And I said to her, can I do Pilates? And she said, I'm not confident you doing Pilates because your back's not good. I don't want you going to a class where someone's not giving you one-on-one attention. So I ended up finding a personal trainer who was also a Pilates instructor, and we just started doing PT sessions, but just Pilates. And then he slowly introduced weight training into my routine. And then often we'd be doing the weight training and then my back would start to hurt, so we'd go back to doing the Pilates. And then he just said to me, on the days you don't see me, come to the gym and just jump on the bike, but just the stationary bicycle with the full back on it, because it will support your back. So I did that, and after a week or so of that, I noticed on the days I wasn't going, my whole back was seizing up. So it was just like not worth it for me not to have a day off. So naturally when you start exercising, you start feeling better, so you start eating better. And I noticed how much better I felt. And I had done some therapy by this stage. I was in, I guess, my first adult relationship, living with my partner, and had started to, just by, having a relationship where, there was some attunement, start to heal some of my trauma that way. And I think that was really helpful. And I remember just saying to a friend one day, because I'd never felt this way before, but I just felt so good, and I had not ever felt that good, and that for that long period of time. I hadn't had depression in a long time. I had a lot of positive thoughts. I could just be going for a walk with my dog, and I'd just look up at the trees and I'd think, wow, that's so beautiful. And I said to my friend, I feel like for the first time in my life, there's love in my heart. I just feel this really beautiful feeling, whereas I'd not known this, but I'd been feeling emotional pain my whole life. So it was like that, and then that just sort of fed into, wanting to eat better. And then naturally at that stage even, I'd stopped eating as much gluten just because I was eating healthier. And then I noticed how much better I felt. And then when I'd eat gluten again, I go, oh, that didn't make me feel very good. I'm very bloated. So you just slowly start to work towards more of that eating well, exercising, taking care of yourself. Yeah, noticing even if I had a bad day, I could go to the gym or I could go for a run, and then I would feel better. I would feel even 10% better. So I'd started using exercise as like a mood stabilizer, and it works amazingly. And weight training in particular, which I've continued ever since, that is really good, not just for obviously your body and your mood, but weight training actually increases that thing in your brain that helps with your own mental resilience, because you're actually, you're really challenging yourself every day. So then you start to believe that you can do hard things. And it just kind of feeds into it.
I think I heard Jordan Peterson talking about a study that was done where they looked at all the different nootropic supplements that support brain function and compared it to exercise, and to see which was more effective in improving cognitive function, mood, and things like this. And they found that physical exercise, in particular weight training, and I think cardiovascular stuff as well, made a bigger difference than any of the nootropic compounds.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think exercise is wonderful for mental health. Yeah. So there's this other myth around mental health that it's all in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of our mental health may be inside our head, but our mental health is also in our environment,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't exist just in our head. We exist in relationship to our environment. We're an organism.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe the collective mental health of our culture is unwell.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that we're just reacting to a sick culture, or, mental health issues that are kind of in society, or in our way of life. And so this is where I think the lifestyle factors come into it. You can make a lot of change to your lifestyle and improve your mood. Another thing Jordan Peterson said, which I've also seen with some of my clients, is they'll come in and tell you that they're depressed, and then when they describe their lifestyle to you, you can see that they're not really depressed. They just have a shitty lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were to make, wholesale changes to their lifestyle, their mood would improve.
Mm-hmm.
So mental health's not just in your head, it's in how are you reacting and responding to your environment. And I think if you're eating well, getting lots of sleep, avoiding intoxicants, getting out in the sunshine, not isolated, interacting with people, getting down the beach, going for walks in nature, all these things can really support mental health over and above, more often than what medication alone can do.
Yes.
And so I want to ask you, have you ever tried using CBD?
No, I haven't. I haven't tried that. I've only ever, gone down the supplementation path and found that to be quite helpful, along with the exercise and everything else I do, and all those factors that you just spoke about, Pete. I also just want to add in, I mean, you said not being isolated, but I think we underestimate the importance of genuine connection and community.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've gained in my life, like a real sense of community in the last year and a half. And that's been like integral in my own healing, and also been so good for my mental health.
Are you
And
talking about love?
No,
No,
no, I
not
mean
love,
just like community, like
because you mentioned you did mention that you had an adult relationship with a man, and that you started to feel like, well,
yeah, and I think I mean, I'm reading a book at the moment on trauma, and it's about healing trauma through like somatic practices and relational trauma.
yeah,
And it says in this book, which is true, you cannot heal relational trauma on your own. You have to heal that in relationship.
right,
And, I believe that like each relationship that you have most of the time does heal a part of you. Like you do go in, I'm not saying that you're each other's healers or that you need to rescue your partner or vice versa, because that's not it at all. But just by being with someone and being attuned to each other and being concerned and wanting to meet each other's needs, that is so healing, especially for me, like growing up in a household where there was very little attunement, and there was no, desire to meet my needs. It was just like, stop whinging, stop sooking, suck it up, just all that kind of thing. To be in relationship with someone where, they're attuned to your needs, and that, when you're able to go to them and express, hey, I'm feeling this, that they're like, okay, I want to help you feel better, or like, how can I support you? Like that stuff is so powerful in healing yourself, but also that community piece. Like I have the most amazing group of friends now, and it's genuine connection, which I spoke about, but that we are so real with each other, and there is nothing that we can't put on the table or speak about, and it's met on the other side with no judgment. It's met on the other side with just compassion and holding space, and not trying to fix or change you, but just that is so incredibly important for your mental health. And sadly, a lot of people, as you said, our culture's sick, don't have that in their lives, or they're just at home scrolling. And that's not good for your mental health. I just took a break on the weekend. I was like, I've been on social media too much lately. So I just took all the apps off my phone, and it was beautiful.
digital detox.
It was so good. Like just read books and went for a hike, and, like just did things that, that nourish you,
Yeah.
And I think
what would you say it is that you get from this sense of community, from having friendships that are really deep and connected, and where you can talk about anything? And what if you had to describe what is it that you get from that? What am I trying to say here? Like, what does that provide that increases your sense of wellness?
Yeah. When I try and explain it to people, because it's hard to explain because a lot of people don't experience this, and I hope that they do. I always wished I would find friends like these, but I never thought I would be that lucky. But if I can put it into a sentence almost, it's like I grew up my whole life being told I was too much, or I was too loud, or I was too this, or I was too that. And so you become a people pleaser and you shrink yourself, and you don't become, you're not authentic. And so you're showing up as a half-assed version of yourself. And you're hiding parts of yourself, and it just feels like resistance. But to find this group of people where I'm not just accepted or tolerated, but I'm celebrated for my full expression of myself.
Wonderful.
It's been honestly one of the most healing things of my life, to be able to be in a place where we just love each other unconditionally, and we celebrate each other for all of our quirks, and people can show up and share the most vulnerable stuff, or share stuff they're ashamed of, they're not proud of, and we just give them love, and we're just like, thank you for sharing. There's no judgment. Like, it's incredible.
I'm so glad I asked that question, because what it elicited in a response from you is just gold, because what I heard you say, and I wasn't sure what the answer was. And so when you grew up, your authentic way of expressing and being was shut down, and you were told you were too much, and you started being inauthentic. And I think that is what's causing the problems in our mental health, is that I can't be myself. It's not okay for me to be myself. I'm too much or not enough. And so therefore I need to be an inauthentic version of myself. And that creates, like, I guess, a mild form of schizophrenia. Like, I'm now split into two me's.
Yes.
The inauthentic me that society or my parents or my teachers want me to be, and the authentic me, which is my true self-expression. And you're saying now that what you get from your group of friends is that you can be authentically you. You don't have to pretend to be anyone else. And you're seen and heard and respected, loved, and even celebrated for being you. And that provides you a lot in terms of your mental health and well-being, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think people can feel that. They say, I know the word depression is thrown around so much. Like, I was having a coffee with a friend a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying, I think I'm depressed, and she was crying, and she's telling me about all the things she's struggling with in her life at the moment. And they're genuinely hard things. And I just said to her, I don't think you're depressed. I said, you have every right to be sad about these things.
Yeah.
And she said, oh, thank you so much. She said, I feel so bad, and I just said, don't feel bad. Like, this is part of you. It's part of who you are, and it's part of your life. Like, I said, people often, she was feeling bad because she's often had this experience of not being able to just be held in, like, just held space for, like, these emotions, because people just want to fix it or shut it down or go, oh, don't cry. And I'm like, no, let it out.
Yeah.
But I said, these people can't hold you in that, because they can't even hold themselves in that. People can't, they can't possibly hold you in your stuff if they haven't been able to hold themselves. And I think that piece that you speak to about that form of schizophrenia, almost, people can't accept all of you because they can't accept all of themselves.
Yeah.
And I think if as a culture we started to become more, heal their own shit to start with, because then you'll stop projecting.
Yes.
And then you'll stop being triggered by other people who are in their full expression.
Yes.
And then start to express yourself. And, not just that, like, if you be yourself and fully show up as yourself, the people that don't like it, they ain't your people. And if you be yourself, you're going to find your people. They will find you.
Yeah.
But until you do that, and I know that's scary, and it needs to happen incrementally, just baby steps. But once you start doing it more and more, you'll find your people, and then it'll just kind of become a bit of a snowball, I think.
Yeah, I like that. I just want to segue a bit to GPs prescribing antidepressants for people. A good friend of mine was telling me a story how she was feeling a bit low one day, so she went off to the GP and she goes, "Oh, I'm feeling a bit low, kind of low energy, not very motivated," and she'd barely spoken for not very long, a minute or something. And he started getting a prescription pad out and writing a prescription. And she asked him, she says, "Oh, what are you doing?" He says, "I'm writing you a prescription for antidepressants." And she said, "Who said anything about being depressed?" She goes, I thought you might check my blood levels to see if I'm anemic or something." And he said, "No, I think you're depressed." And she goes, "Even if I was depressed, I don't want a tablet. I just need to go to the beach more, or maybe train more, or eat better, or stay away from alcohol." So, that I'm like, wow, how quick, he was ready to write a prescription. And it reminds me of this. There was a study done, and they were looking at to see how quick, like when you're going to see a GP, a doctor, and you start explaining what you're there for, how quick is it before the doctor interrupts you with, his diagnosis, or, interrupts your explanation of why you're there. And do you know what the average time was?
What was it?
11 seconds. So that's a startling finding.
That's
So,
wild.
so you go to the doctor, say, "Oh, I'm not feeling very well, feeling a bit down, I've got low motivation, not sleeping that well, I'm a bit off my food, my appetite's gone a bit. Oh, here's a prescription for an antidepressant." That's only like 11 seconds. So you've been to see me recently, and you came and saw me, and we did it like a therapeutic session, and I think I listened to you for about 5 hours that day, which is a little bit longer than 11 seconds, isn't it?
Yeah. It was incredible.
Did you find that healing?
Oh my God, so much.
I call that a therapeutic listening. I think, and this is what I think you get, or we get, when we find our community of people that love us for who we are and don't need to shame us or shut us down, is that we get to be seen and heard. And that when we do go to them with our problems or our issues, that we're heard. And quite often that's all we really need. And I think this is where, a lot of healthcare professionals let their patients and clients down, is that they don't listen long enough and to really hear what's going on for someone. And I'll share another story. I've worked in emergency rooms quite a bit, and there was, I'll share two stories actually. I can be a bit of a storyteller. I don't know if you know that about me. But there was a young man had come in, he was in his 30s, and I was standing at the bedside just, talking to him and getting his story, what he was presenting for. And while I was talking to him, the psychiatric registrar on call came in with his notepad and, pen, and said, "Oh, I'm the psychiatrist, Dr. So-and-so, and I'm just here to assess you." And the young man said, "Well, how much time do you have?" And the psychiatrist says, "Well, we've got about 40 minutes. And he says, "Oh, look, I don't want to waste your time, doc. It'll take you a million years to understand me." And I was sitting there watching it, and the psychiatrist looked at him and said, "I think you're actually right," and got up and walked away.
Wow.
That actually happened. And the guy, he wasn't that too distressed. He wanted to come in and, see if he needed support for his mental health. And, I think he wanted more than 40 minutes of the psychiatrist's time to be able to let him know what was going on for him. And I think he ended up self-discharging. I had quite a long chat with him. He didn't seem like he was in too much bother. And another story I want to share is another young man. This was in the emergency department. This was in Los Angeles. And he came in, and he was quite distressed and visibly upset, quite erratic in his behaviour. And he was put on a gurney, like a trolley. And one of the nurses went up to have a chat with him and didn't get anywhere, got quite heated, the exchange, and so the nurse walked off a bit frustrated. And so then the mental health nurse went over and attempted to have a conversation with this guy, and that got quite got quite agitated and confrontational, and so the mental health nurse walked away, and so then the one of the emergency room doctors went over and tried to have a conversation with this guy, and that didn't go well either. Then the social worker came and attempted to just have a regular conversation with this guy, and each conversation just deteriorated pretty rapidly into a confrontation, and there were several other people who came in and attempted to just build some rapport with this guy, and nobody had success. And in fact, he was getting more and more agitated. And I was just standing back and watching and witnessing the whole thing. And so the janitor, the guy who cleans the emergency department, he'd been there the whole time, witnessing the whole thing, and he was going through the department with his broom, sweeping up, and this guy was quite agitated, the patient, to the point where we were about to call security on him. He was so agitated. And the janitors walked past his bed with his broom, and he's looked at the patient and said, "Hey, buddy, if you don't like what you're thinking, just change it." And you see like the pennies drop in this guy, and his whole face and attitude changed, and he just became calm like a lamb, like in an instant. And after that, he was fine, and he was able to also self-discharge from the emergency department. And so, he had at least half a dozen qualified people with degrees attempt to establish some rapport with him to help him with his mental health issue. And it was, the lowest qualified, lowest paid person in the emergency department that day who made the biggest difference. So just a couple of little stories I thought I'd share from my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes it's just, people don't have the tools to help themselves. That is a tool. If you don't like what you're thinking, change it. That's a tool, but that might not occur to someone who's deep in rumination and depression and they're just spiraling. When you're in that, sometimes it's really hard to pull yourself out. And if you don't have those tools, hey, you could stay there forever if you wanted. But also what you were saying about the doctors prescribing or getting their prescription pad out in 11 seconds. Not to kind of make GPs the devil, because they're not, and that's how they've been trained. They are there to treat a symptom. But, and I say this about everything, but the world would be a better place with more curiosity. And one of the reasons why I want to tell my story is because I want people to know that they can walk their own path if the path they're on is not necessarily working for them, but to be curious and to know that I believe that we can be our own healers, and we have all the answers within us, but you have to get in touch with yourself first and not just necessarily go to the doctor and get them to tell you the answer in 11 seconds when really it could take a million years. But to actually go deep within yourself and go, what's working here, what's not, how am I feeling? Not going, I've got a problem, I need a prescription. What's not working? What else could I do? And I think that that's really important. Doctors don't have time. I know it's a problem in the system. They're just trying to get out 11-second prescriptions because they've got 30 people waiting.
Yeah.
But just to know that you can, go within and be curious and find those answers. I mean, doctors, yes, the world would be a better place of curiosity, and the doctor would do better to be curious with each consultation. But the poor guy probably, or woman, has no time to spend 30 minutes, an hour with someone actually delving deep. But
yeah, I agree with you. I think the system is broken. If a GP only has 10 minutes to assess, diagnose, and come up with a care plan or treatment plan, it's not enough time, is it? As good as they are, and there are wonderful GPs out there, and the healthcare system is remarkable in many ways. When it comes to mental health, I think it's the system's definitely broken, and I don't think we know how to fix it. And so what I heard you say is that for you took some agency and some self-responsibility in terms of, and you said we can heal ourselves. So you took it upon yourself to become your own healer. I think sometimes we have the wrong, we frame it wrong in our mind when we go to the doctor, because we're going to the doctor to find out what's wrong with us. And that's not really the right context. There's nothing wrong with us. We might be having some symptoms or some complaint. And really the doctors, I think the way the doctor should present is as a partner, not telling you or being the healer, but a partner in you healing yourself, and, providing different ways for you to do that. But ultimately, I think we are our own healers. And I don't think, doctors can do anywhere near what our own body can do in terms of our own healing. And so I think taking some agency and responsibility for our own healing is a big part of it. Mm-hmm. What would you say? So, yeah, I'd like to maybe if you could share a bit more about your healing story and how you took responsibility for it and how you made that happen. Yeah.
I think I spent a lot of time in my 20s in therapy working through some big trauma, like particularly from childhood. I also just knew, like, I've gone back to my parents and had big fights with them and confronted them about some of the things that they've done to me as a child that I don't agree with, and quite frankly, child abuse. Like, they were really horrific, some of the things, but there was no empathy or kind of remorse there either. So I knew I wasn't going to get what I wanted from them. But eventually you just stop, or you get sick of your own shit, really. You stop playing the victim and you go, I'm not going to get what I need here. I need to give this to myself. And I don't know who said this, but that great saying is, what happened to you is not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility.
Yeah.
And once you start on the path of doing all this self-work, you realize, and I know a lot of people shy away from it because it's too painful to go there sometimes in the beginning, but I believe, and it's been my experience, that yes, you can do the hard work, but what's on the other side of that is a life better than you could have ever imagined. And you just unravel the trauma and you unravel the pain, and then you become better in your relationships, which then you develop deeper and deeper connections, which then helps with your healing. And just, as I said before, I treat myself like my own experiment. Like, I've done lots of different things. I think the main things that have been, I guess, the most profound and transformational and healing for me have been, and these are all things I've pretty much been doing the last 2 years. So internal family systems parts work, that's been incredible. And I've been practicing that for 2 years after I did a course in that. I'd like to become a parts work facilitator. If the IFS gods out there are listening, you could get me in. That'd be amazing. Because I just want to share that modality with people, and that piece you spoke to earlier about that, our own version of schizophrenia, because we have fragmented parts of ourselves that we hide. Parts work's such an amazing modality in getting back in touch with those parts and integrating them back in, like your shadow, which you do a lot of shadow work. That breath work's been incredible, and plant medicine. Like I've been able to reach another level of healing with those three modalities that I just couldn't do in therapy. Therapy is great, but I personally believe, and it has been my own experience, and I'm not saying this is everybody's, therapy is great when you have a big trauma to work through, or you're just dealing with something really rough in your life at the moment and you just need that help to get through, and you need a professional, you need that extra support at that time in your life for whatever reason. But personally, I've found therapy ongoing, long-term, for years and years and years, to not necessarily be that helpful. Personally, I have lots of other support in my life and I do lots of other things right now, but I see a therapist only every 3 months, and it's literally just a check-in, and I love seeing her because she'll just give me a perspective that I don't get from anywhere else in my life. But we just touch, like check in, do our hour session. I'm like, great, I'll see you in 3 months, and off I go. And it's like that, doing that weekly, and I think a lot of people have had this experience. If you're just doing it weekly or fortnightly, however long, but there's no actual thing you're working on, you just seem to be going around in circles. Like, it's not helpful after a while. I think therapy has its place, but there's other things you can do out there. I mean, like, breathwork's a great one. It's free, and you can release so much of your stuff just somatically through breathwork.
Yeah, look, I share some of that opinion with you. I had complex PTSD from my childhood, and so I was in group psychotherapy for 2 years in my early 20s, and So, therapy in the way I was exposed to it was really about me getting in touch with all my emotions and my feelings, which I wasn't in touch with. And, I unearthed all sorts of fear and grief and sadness and hurt and anger, and was, for the first time given a space where I could express all that emotion. But I also walked out of therapy, 2 years of therapy, with a big victim story, that I was damaged and that my parents didn't love me and that I was, abused. And in some ways, I think therapy just reinforced a lot of my sad story and my victim identity. And it wasn't until I did more inner work that you were talking about and looking at, and a bit like IFS or my own version of it, and disappearing that whole seeing myself as a victim, because a lot of my suffering wasn't in what happened to me, but in what I made it mean and the story I told myself, about what happened. Therapy can be helpful and has been, but there's other things you can do. Breath work. So I've done quite a few holotropic breath work sessions. I find them really helpful for if I can't access my emotions, because I sometimes struggle to feel grief or fear. And so when they're there and I can't access them, I'll go do a breathwork session and I'm able to cathartically access and release those emotions, and I come out of that feeling a lot better. So you mentioned also plant medicines.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you mean by plant medicines? Can you tell me what you mean by that? Maybe name plant medicines.
Sure. So there's 2 plant medicines I've worked with, MDMA and psilocybin, and they've been like so incredible in healing, like either some big trauma or just like being able to move through things that I was holding on to. And also, like, I find psilocybin to be a great one to give you, for me personally, was like gave me a lot of clarity and just like made sense of a lot of things. And also, I think all my experiences, I've been able to see a more balanced view of them, because there's light and, the law of polarity, there's light and dark in everything, there's good and bad in everything. But to be able to see the whole picture and to see both sides and to acknowledge the pain or to acknowledge the hard stuff or how someone's done you wrong, but also it's been incredible for me in forgiving people, which you can't quite get there in therapy, or you can't quite get there by doing the inner work, but the plant medicine takes the lid off and takes the fear away, so you can go in deep and you're able to see it in its full spectrum and forgive people. And like, I think you've mentioned, Pete, like, I mean, forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for you, but it's to let go of the stones in your heart. And like, you have a lightness when you're able to let go and forgive people and let them go, and just move on with your life.
Yeah, those 2 plant medicines you named, so MDMA and psilocybin, there's a lot of clinical trials going on now looking at those. And I've been following this work for quite a long time and got quite interested in the work that Rick Doblin's doing with MAPS in California. When I saw the results, they get like 80% of war veterans can be cured from their PTSD after 1 or 2 sessions using MDMA. And they're looking at they're doing trials at the moment in Australia. And I've really read into this, and when I was overseas, I did an MDMA therapy treatment for my complex PTSD and got, remarkable results from that. And I was talking to someone about how it works, and I was really surprised by it. It made total sense to me. So from my understanding, when trauma happens when you're young, or it can happen when you as an adult, and you become overwhelmed, your psyche, your unconscious mind, has mechanisms for you to protect yourself from that trauma, particularly if it's overwhelming. And so what you can do in order to just get on with life and survive, you lock that experience away. If it's too traumatic and you can't complete that experience, you harden up and you go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which you reminded me of.
I'm a fan.
Yeah. These are different responses to a stressful event. You go into fight or flight or freeze. If you go into those, you get stuck in your trauma, and you don't get to complete the process. And what your mind does, your unconscious mind, is takes that, it's like a Polaroid shot of what's going on and locks it away, compartmentalizes it in part of your unconscious. It's like, I'll deal with that later because it's too hard and I can't deal with it now because I'm too young, I'm too upset, I don't have the resources, so I just need to get on with life, so I'm not facing this now. But our subconscious mind holds all those memories, and it holds it as a story, a fantasy, a somatic body experience, an emotion. It all gets locked away behind a closed door. And then what your unconscious mind does is it puts a guard in front of that door. And those guards are your psychological defenses that stop you opening that door and having a look at all those painful memories. And those psychological defenses are things like dissociation, repression, intellectualization, humor, and there's several dozen of different psychological defenses. And so that guard's sitting in front of the door, and you can't get access to those traumatic memories, which is where the healing lies. And so you go see a regular therapist, and they can take you all the way up to the door. And I've had clinical psychologists, colleagues of mine talk to me about this, and they say, I can't get them past their defenses. And I understand that. And this is where I think my understanding from what I've read and my own experience is that what MDMA does, and they don't know how it does this or the mechanism, but they know that it's serotonin driven, is that it takes the psychological defenses down. So the guard in front of the door stands down, and you now can open that door. You now have access to all those memories, thoughts, feelings, sensations and emotions. And as a resourced adult with all that material, you're able to join all the dots up and make a complete picture, or what they call a gestalt. And when you can see the whole picture, you can get complete and resolved and reconciled about that trauma. Does that ring a bell for you? Is that was that similar to what you experienced?
Definitely. And also the way you were describing that, parts work is very helpful for that too. Parts work, the way that works is that that those defenses, we in parts work call those protectors. And behind that protector, behind that door, is an inner child that's still stuck in that moment. They're still wounded and they're still stuck in that moment in time.
Yeah.
But we experience that emotion that inner child is experiencing, whether that's terror, fear, whatever. We experience that in our adult bodies, and it's like because that part of us is still stuck in time.
Yes.
And in parts work, because it's very experiential, and you go into it like a bit of meditation. So you kind of close your eyes and you feel into this protector. And then eventually, like the protector will, once you develop a kind of relationship with it, it will show you that memory of that child. And you're able to go in. For me, I've been able to go into those memories where I can say, go back to my childhood home where my 4-year-old self is sitting in a room crying her eyes out and screaming, and like no one's coming to soothe her, and she's still stuck there just because children can't regulate themselves. They need their parent to do that. But I'm able to go in as my adult self and take her out of there and have her and I take her out of there and I hug her and soothe her and give her exactly what she needs. And that's how you can start to heal those parts of yourself. But the plant medicine's just another level. Like you're able to just fully go in. There's just, the protector's gone. Yeah. And you can fully go in and just, heal in a way that it's, you can't get to in therapy. And that what you were talking about, the MAP stuff in America, there's you would have heard of them, that organisation in Australia called Mind Medicine. I've got a book of theirs, and it's just a book of all of these different stories of people who've healed their PTSD. There's war veterans in there, but there's loads of other people with all sorts of traumas and through different plant medicines have been able to heal and just feel a peace and just, heal the pain that they've always lived with and always struggled with. Like it's quite profound and transformational, the powers that this stuff has. And I think it's really cool and definitely a step in the right direction that it has been legalised in Australia somewhat.
Yeah, rescheduled. Some of our audience might not relate to MDMA as a plant medicine, so I'd just like to speak to that for a moment. So for those that don't know, MDMA is also known as the party drug ecstasy, or ecstasy was a street name given to MDMA as a marketing tool back in the 80s. But the active ingredient when it's in ecstasy is MDMA. And so MDMA actually comes from the sassafras tree, which grows in the northern hemisphere, and they take the root bark of the tree and they press an essential oil out of there called saffrole, and then they take that saffrole and add an ammonia salt in like a semi-synthetic process and produce MDMA, which is like a white crystalline substance, and then that's the medication. So it is a plant medicine, but it's synthesized somewhat in the lab, but it's not a fully synthesized compound. And 70% of all pharmaceuticals have some plant derivative in them. So, yeah, MDMA is a plant medicine. The other one you mentioned, psilocybin, is the active ingredient in, I don't like the term magic mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms.
Yeah, they're pretty magical though.
Yeah, but yeah, it's interesting. I think everything's magical.
It is.
Yeah, if the Big Bang is how we got here, and then the Big Bang's magical.
Yeah,
just the fact that we're sitting here having a conversation is magical. So that's why I don't like the term magic mushrooms, because it can be misleading in that, better stay away from those mushrooms. They're magical and mysterious. But like you say, in Australia just recently the TGA rescheduled psilocybin and MDMA, took them out of Schedule 9 into Schedule 8, or schedule in between 8 and 9, saying that they now can be used for research purposes and that they can be prescribed by authorised psychiatrists, which is a small step. It's not a big enough step, but I think it's a step in the right direction to making these wonderful nature-given plant medicine compounds available to people who really are struggling with mental health and trauma. And yeah, it's exciting to know that these options are available. And I've like I said, I've travelled overseas to Mexico and Peru and Costa Rica and places like these where these things are legal. And I've experimented with these plant medicines myself and found that they can be very helpful in terms of facilitating self-healing. And like you, in terms of my mental health, I take agency and responsibility for my own healing. I don't like to outsource my mental health healing to a person in a white lab coat. I think that's me giving my agency and responsibility for my mental health over to someone else. I don't mind having a doctor or a therapist be a partner in my mental health, but I don't see them as the healer. I see myself as the healer. So, yeah, psilocybin and MDMA, it's exciting times, and I think that these will become slowly more and more available to people. And these are, and the other thing I think I wanted to speak to is that quite often what's behind how mental health symptoms show up is the trauma, the unhealed trauma from our childhood or adulthood or teenage years, whatever it is. And so would you say that that's true in your case, that your mental health problems or complaints, you can see a connection between the trauma from your childhood?
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not like a chemical imbalance in your brain or something that you got genetically? Do you think it's more a result of childhood trauma?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. And just like the feelings that I felt and the pain and the anxiety, I spent most of my life in fight or flight, due to childhood trauma, that, people, sometimes I'd meet people that didn't have the kind of upbringing that I did or didn't have the trauma that I had, and I just think, oh my gosh, you're so calm. Imagine what that's like.
But they probably had parents that loved them and nurtured them and protected them.
And were attuned to them and could meet their emotional needs. I read something the other day that your parents only have to meet 30% of your emotional needs for you to have a secure attachment style.
Right.
And I was like, oh, the bar's pretty low.
That is low, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like this word attunement that you've used a few times now, and maybe some of our audience might not know what you mean by that. And so would you like to give your explanation of what you mean by attunement?
Sure. So being attuned to someone is, I guess, noticing when they're upset or they're distressed or what have you, and being able to kind of stop what you're doing and be on their level, or even just when someone comes to you someone you have a relationship with in any capacity, and they say, you know, like whether they're telling you that they're upset or whether you're just noticing, but being able to help them regulate by being sensitive to what they're feeling. And even if you say, I don't know, say it's a partner and you've had a fight with them over something and your partner disagrees with you, but they're still willing to stop and listen to say why you're upset and like what their behavior did to maybe hurt you in some way, and being able to, you know, apologize and actually just have a discussion about it and have some sort of repair there. Like that's all part of attunement. Like, and that's where healing happens in those kinds of interactions in relationships versus, you know, if you do tell someone you're upset and then they just fly off the handle or they don't want to take responsibility or even, just acknowledge that they've maybe hurt you in some way. Like they just, that's the opposite, I guess. And that can, if you've had those experiences in the past, it can re-traumatize you if you're having those experiences again.
So by attunement, like the person's on your level, they have empathy. They able to relate to how you feel, and they're able to communicate to you that they relate to how you feel.
Yeah.
And not abandoning you, but they're not withdrawing from how you're being, but they're willing to meet you in how you're being.
Yeah, and also what attunement isn't, because this is probably a less extreme form, but when that person goes, oh, cheer up, you'll be right, or, you know, that toxic positivity, like that is the opposite of attunement. It doesn't make people feel seen, heard, or empathized with, and it's not actually doing them any favors. Like, you know, that whole cheer up. Like when I've been depressed, people are like, cheer up, you'll be right. Like, oh yeah, like I didn't think of that. Like it's not that simple.
Yeah, I could have thought of that myself.
Yeah.
I think attunement for me is something like when a child's upset and the mother picks it up and the child feels the comfort of the mother, and then both are attuned, and the mother's responding to her natural instincts to pick up the crying child. The child then feels held. I think oxytocin is actually released by both the mother and the child when the mother picks up a crying child, and the oxytocin is a very calming, bonding hormone neurotransmitter that brings about this feeling of safety and comfort. And there's another thing that we got these, I think they call them mirror neurons that we have, where we're able to see the mirror neurons are there to help us attune to another person and resonate with what they're feeling, and to feel that and have empathy and meet them where they're at. I actually did a training here in Byron Bay probably about 5 years ago, attunement therapy. It was created by a local guy, Tristan Bray, and in the therapy, what it basically is that you hold a person for 90 minutes and they have their head on your chest over your heart, and you set up some safety parameters, like, you know, so that this is therapeutic touch, that they're safe, that it's for them, and that you don't have any need or requirement of them. There's a few things you need to set up beforehand. Then the person puts their head on your chest, and you just as the practitioner, you take on the attitude of being like a loving parent. And so you put your arms around the person and just hold them. And so in the training, I got to experience what that's like to receive an attunement session and to also give one. And it's amazing that, you know, and it takes 90 minutes because something's going on in the body because your ear's right over the person's heart and you're hearing their heartbeat.
Yeah.
And you're attuning to that person's heart, their body. You're feeling safe and comfortable. You relax, and that fight or flight, that stress response completely calms down. And something starts happening in the body, and I don't know fully what's going on, you know, neurochemically. Although at one point, I think I was releasing DMT because I was starting to see this violet light.
Oh my gosh!
In my third eye.
Yeah.
And I came out of that session, receiving the session, like really calm, and use the word regulated. So emotionally regulated. And so that someone's actually created a therapy around attunement. And
Sounds really powerful.
it was awesome. I really and I did provide that for a while, for probably about 12 months after I did that training. I did provide quite a few sessions to people.
Wow.
And then I've just got busy with other projects and things. But I think he's definitely onto something there. And just like when a child falls over, hurts themselves, they go to their mum and they have this attunement, although that wasn't always the case in my childhood. But I think attunement is a part of our healing process. And I think that's what happens with in talk therapy. Quite often, because you don't have to hold or touch a person to attune with them. And there was this thing that happened with, they asked 4 of the most effective therapists. This is going back, I think, in the 50s or somewhere. There was 4 very well-known effective therapists, Carl Rogers, Erik Erikson, Fritz Perls, and Virginia Satir. And they asked them what was it that made them so effective as therapists. And they all answered pretty much the same. They said that it wasn't any technique or therapeutic method that they were using. They all thought that it was the quality of the relationship that they established with the patient that made the biggest difference in terms of the person's well-being. So I think it's the quality of the therapeutic relationship in therapy, which is a form of attunement.
Yeah.
That when a person experiences being heard, seen, cared for, and has an empathetic person, then they are able to self-regulate and self-heal. Maybe it provides a level of safety and, takes that fight-flight response down, and in a more safe environment, you can do your own healing.
Yeah, I think that big key component of all of that is that curiosity. Like when you meet someone with curiosity, even if you don't understand them or you don't know where they're coming from, you even think it might be a bit weird, just put your shit aside and just be curious. Trying to understand another human being, like that is going to facilitate that connection. Like that's going to help with the attunement, like just being curious. Like I think the world would be a better place with it if everyone just approached things from a place of curiosity.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. I'm naturally curious. I'm like an open person. And when I'm working with my clients, I'm basically just a big, opening for curiosity. And I don't know what's best for anyone else. I struggle sometimes to know what's best for myself. But when my clients come and see me, I'm just curious about who they are, what they're dealing with. And basically, when I'm working with clients, I generally just ask a lot of questions. And that seems to, I don't know what it does for my clients. Only they can tell me that. But they certainly, I think like you're saying, that curiosity, maybe it makes them curious about themselves. And then they can explore, like you say, what's the historical origins of my trauma and my mental health. I did mention CBD before, and the reason I mentioned that, so that's a plant medicine. So CBD is cannabidiol. So it's a cannabinoid that comes from the cannabis or marijuana plant. And there's some pretty good anecdotal evidence coming out of the States and other places to show that CBD is quite a wonderful supplement for people with bipolar, in that it's very effective in moderating the highs and lows of the mood. So it's like a mood stabilizer. And I've got a family member who's got bipolar type 1, and she's had quite a difficult time because her illness was quite severe at times. Over the last 5 years, she's been really well, and she uses CBD and said it made a big difference in her ability to regulate the highs and lows of her mood. And CBD's now available on prescription in Australia. It took us a long time to get there. And so that's another supplement that people with bipolar could consider. CBD is the safest compound known on the planet. We actually have an endocannabinoid system within us, so we're hardwired to receive CBD as a medicine. And there's been not a single death attributed to CBD in the medical literature. So it is the safest compound. So I think, if it's that safe, it couldn't hurt to trial it and see if it makes a difference. And not if it doesn't, well, it doesn't, but if it does, then, it's my personal philosophy is that, because CBD is wonderful for so many other things. It's anticonvulsant, it treats glaucoma, it helps with anxiety. It's got so many benefits that I think CBD should be prescribed first for most conditions. And if it doesn't help, then prescribe other pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, or even just those, I know this isn't how Western medicine works, but like the lowest hanging fruit, like why are you not asking about diet first?
Yeah.
Like why are you not asking about like alcohol first? Or and that's the thing too, a lot of people, and especially in Australian culture, maybe haven't been diagnosed with a mental illness, but there is something underlying there, and it might not be a mental illness per se. It could just be a lot of trauma that hasn't been dealt with, and people are using drugs and alcohol on a daily basis to manage their mental health.
Yes.
And that's just how they've coped. But like, it kind of numbs the pain, but like a lot of pharmaceutical medications do the same thing. Like they're just masking something.
Yes.
But it's not actually making you well. It's just like a Band-Aid or, Panadol. Like the ad says, if symptoms persist, see your doctor. Like it's not meant to be taken every day. If you've got a headache for a month straight, there's something wrong there. It's like, well, if there's a condition underneath that it's not being like fixed or improved in any way, unless you keep on with this, then maybe look into something else that, is going to help you. But like, the diet, the CBD, the supplements, like they're all from plants. Like we're meant to consume plants. Like they're part of part of our diet. Yeah. Like it's just the lowest hanging fruit. It makes more sense. It doesn't have side effects. It doesn't, make you feel like crap. So like, why wouldn't you want to try, just experiment with these little things? Like you could, even if you want to stay on medication, you could stay on medication, but maybe eat a little bit better, give up gluten or, whatever it is.
So your pathway was that you trialled the pharmaceutical approach. It didn't really work for you. Then you decided to look at your diet and you changed your diet reasonably radically. Decided to stop drinking alcohol. I think that's a good choice. Exercise, you started exercising a lot. And then you looked at, well, is this coming from trauma from childhood? And you've used a couple of plant medicines, MDMA and psilocybin, therapeutically to help you deal with your trauma. And you're doing great now. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Thriving.
Yeah.
Like I have my days, I have bad moods, I have, periods of joy and periods of sadness. But in all honesty, it's not these mood episodes that will just happen as they do. Like I have moods because there's things going on in my life that correlate with that. Having a sad day, it's because I'm dealing with something that's sad. And I guess part of the breath work and like the somatic practices, like that has allowed me, plant medicine in particular was kind of the catalyst for me to start feeling safe enough in my body to start feeling my emotions. And like that's been part of my healing as well, being able to sit in my own emotion and feel it and it not feel too big or too scary or just, I can't handle this, I need to stuff it down.
Oh, that's a good point. So there was a time in your life when it felt difficult to allow yourself to feel your emotions?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of my life being in fight or flight, being in hypervigilance, and my window of tolerance was so tiny. Any little extra emotion, I was just like, I can't deal with this. And I would use all sorts of things to numb out, like name your poison, alcohol. Like I did used to take a lot of party drugs when I was a lot younger, like chocolate. Oh my God. Like I used to eat chocolate every single day and couldn't go a day without it. And that was just me numbing out.
So they're all attempts to self-medicate the emotional pain or even inability to feel the emotional pain.
Yeah.
Like I'm just numbing that pain because I can't face it. I don't know how to face it. I don't know what to do with it. So I'll trial all these other alcohol, cigarettes, party drugs, whatever. And, there's even stigma against people using things like that. I don't have any ethical, moral or stigmatizing judgment around people self-medicating because I think it's an attempt to feel better and that these things need to be seen for what they are rather than stigmatized. But they're not good long-term solutions, a lot of them.
Well, alcohol, people will use alcohol to, de-stress on a Friday night. Alcohol increases your cortisol. Like, that's not helping.
Right.
I know it might numb you out, but it's not actually helping you long term.
So rather than numbing these emotions and painful memories and things, so you stopped numbing them and started to allow yourself to feel them and face them and process them, work through them.
Yeah, breathwork helped me to start bringing a lot of unintegrated stuff to the surface. And then I have a practice, and I still do this every day. I've been doing this for about a year now, but I do breathwork twice a day, 15 minutes morning and night. And then at the end of my breathwork session, I pull out my journal and I just write down anything that's come up. And that just allows me to kind of move through things like in a much gentler way. Like often I've done breathwork sessions where I didn't feel any emotion. I didn't even have any thoughts come up. But when I finished, I opened my eyes and I've got tears coming out. It's my body's releasing unintegrated emotion there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you feel better when that.
Totally.
I always feel better when I release a stuck emotion.
100%.
Maybe some people out there listening maybe can relate to feeling like they have suppressed emotions and maybe, I certainly had that. Like I was saying in my early 20s, what I got from going to therapy was access to my emotions. And when they first started coming up, there was so many of them, it was really quite frightening.
Yep.
I had to put a lid on them. I'm like, oh, this is too scary. But the whole idea of the therapist, is there to help you feel comfortable with those. But there's more to it than just processing the emotions, isn't there? And you talked about internal family systems and looking at these parts of yourself and working with those parts to understand your personality better. And is there anything else you'd like to share about your? Okay. So where I would like to go with it. So, what was the woman's name who wrote the book? Do you remember?
Aspen Morrow.
Now she had type 1.
Yes.
Which is a more severe form of the illness, isn't it? And so she wrote the book. And what was her experience? Did she start on medication and then stop taking medication?
Yeah, she had such a horrible time on medication. And at one point, I think she was on 4 different types of antipsychotics at once. And she just couldn't take it anymore. The side effects were so horrific. She was like, I'm not doing this anymore. So she did her own research and started to, look into diet and introducing probiotics and did so much research on all of this stuff. And she said, this is not new. Like, this has been around for decades. Like, people have done all this research, but you just don't hear about it. She just started like nutritional, like supplementation. And she just found that she became well, and she hadn't had an episode in 10 years, and she's a mother now, and like she's thriving, she's well. And she's just, doing really good. She calls herself a fully recovered psych patient.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
She probably had a doctor that told her that she was going to have it the rest of her life.
Yeah, when she was going to have children, they told her psychiatrist said, I would advise that you don't.
Wow.
And that's more stigma, in the mental health space.
You're not fit to be a mother.
Or you're incapable. And for a long time, like, I had so much stigma around it, so much shame, but I also thought, maybe I'm not capable of anything. Maybe I can't even hold down a job. Maybe I can't have a family. Maybe I can't have a business because, that's what the world tells you. And then further, media then fuels it. Like, I remember in 2020 when we were all stuck at home in lockdowns, my partner at the time, I'd sit at the dining table doing my uni work and he'd sit on the sofa watching Netflix after Netflix, and he's watching a series called Ozark. And there's a character in this story that had bipolar and stopped taking his medication and then murdered someone. And I mean, I wasn't watching it, but I could hear everything. And I was so angry. I was like, that storyline is just further perpetuating that stigma and making people afraid of people who've been diagnosed with a mental health condition. And I have noticed, like, I don't care now. I've worked through so much, and I did a lot of kinesiology to work through the shame and stigma that I felt. And getting over that whole, I'm so afraid what other people will think. If people react badly to me if I tell them, because I have no shame around it whatsoever, and that's another reason I wanted to share that story, was because I want other people to know that if they have had a mental health diagnosis, there is absolutely no shame in that whatsoever.
Yeah.
you've got some quirks, you've got some little things where you might need some extra support around you, get that. And also, I wanted to say this earlier when you were talking about depression and suicidal thoughts, like, no, because I know this now, I haven't always, but when I've ever had those thoughts now, to know that is not you, that is your depression talking, and it's a liar. Like, it's not true. Like, and even if you do feel like that in that moment, no, it's depression. I've shared this with you before, but I want to share this just as well. Like, one of the things that's helped me so much, probably more than anything, is exercise and weight training. And I've dragged my ass to the gym on the days when I've been the most depressed I've ever been. And it's taken every ounce of energy I've had to do it. But I think this is really powerful in sharing, and it's kind of symbolic that every single rep that I pumped out that took everything I had, I would say in my own head, fuck you, depression, you're not going to win. And you've got to get up and you've got to fight it every day, but know that those thoughts are not you. They are just your depression talking, and they're a liar. Like, and just to know, like, keep going, it'll get better. Like, you'll get through this. And also a beautiful thing about it is, that kind of story I've just told about the gym, it's like that stuff, it's character building, but it also makes you know yourself and know what you're capable of.
Yeah.
But I also say to a lot of people, in this life, to know your light, you have to know your darkness. And to have gone there with like the deepest of darkness, you'll be able to access the brightest of your light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've experienced darkness in your life.
Oh, yeah. Like the darkest of dark days.
I guess you have to want to end it all. You got to be in a pretty dark space to consider. And look, I think it's way more common than people think. Like, I've had those thoughts before in my life. I don't really relate to having ever really had depression, or I felt low mood, and I think there was times when I felt really low and sad and felt like I didn't want to be here anymore. And but I've never been diagnosed with depression. So that the darkness, that's some people don't want to go there or don't want to think or consider that they have any darkness in them, and we tend to avoid those kind of thoughts, or maybe we don't know how to look at the darkness safely or comfortably. And something that I do shadow work, and so for me it's something that I'm curious about, and like you, I think that looking at the dark or the hidden stuff is can be really quite healing, and it's been part of your process is to have to go through that darkness and depressive feelings in order to come out, as light as you are, and as inspiring as you are.
And just the acceptance piece as well, like to resist it is sometimes not helpful. Like, get up, fight, go to the gym, like do what you've got to do to even make yourself feel 1% better that day. I've had days where I'm like, Megan, if you get out of bed and you make your bed, my whole thing's I have to make my bed and I have to have a shower and get dressed. And I'm like, if that's all I do today, it's a good day. And if that's all you can do today, do that and give yourself a high five. Like, that's awesome. Go you. But also I've always found really helpful, whether it's depression or anxiety or anything, like actually just sitting there alone and just saying out loud, I feel depressed. And it instantly makes me feel lighter because I'm then not resisting, or I feel anxious. Just going, okay, I feel anxious.
Yeah.
And it's like you suddenly just kind of drop your shoulders a little bit.
That's a great bit of advice right there. And I agree with that. And I've used that with clients before, where it's not the feeling, it's the resistance to the feeling. That's quite often the issue. And people say, well, I'm feeling really angry, but they're not really saying it in an angry tone. So they're actually resisting feeling angry. And I'll sometimes encourage them to go deeper into the feeling. And if they do allow themselves to feel it, it dissipates. And it's when we don't allow ourselves to feel our emotions that they tend to persist and can get worse. So I think that's clever that you recognise that it's feelings are all feelings are valid and have their place, and allowing yourself to just feel it, it's more likely to, like I say, dissipate than if you're afraid to feel it, and it's going to hang around and persist and maybe cause problems.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I really like and resonate with your approach, and really pleased for you that you looked for alternatives to the mainstream mental health approach to your mental wellness, and sounds like it's really working for you. You look like you're thriving.
Yeah.
I know you're thriving, and hasn't always been that way. And your story, I don't think you're the only one with this story. I think there are other stories out there like this, and I think people do need to hear that there are other options. And as we said before, like, everybody's different, and we're not suggesting that med-free approaches to mental health is for everybody, but for some people it might be the way.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to anybody out there who may be listening to your story or experience, or anything that you could say in way of encouragement to let them know that they're not alone, that and not necessarily to accept the diagnosis as a life sentence, but to take some ownership or responsibility for their well-being? Like, what can is there something you'd like to say to encourage people through their experience? Like, what would you like to have heard when you were going through difficult times from like, if you got a really empathic and a therapeutic relationship with a health professional, how would you like to have been diagnosed and supported through your process, rather than having to find your own way? What would have been a good experience for you?
I guess more of a holistic approach, and I feel like Australia maybe lacks that in a lot of ways, in which America does a bit better. Like, there's more holistic psychiatrists and doctors and things like that. But, like, I was told, you will have this condition for the rest of your life, you'll be on medication for the rest of your life, here are your options, or you can choose to take nothing. So there was no alternative, and I would have loved to have heard, even if, like a story like my own, just to know that, like, yes, I tried the traditional path of medication. When I also went on supplementation, I only went off medication because my partner and I were going to try and conceive. It wasn't actually something that I considered I would do.
Okay.
I thought I'd go back on medication once I was able to.
Okay.
Had we have gone down that path, but we didn't. But, I found I'm so well on these SUPs, so I've stayed on them and it's working for me, and I'll continue to do so. But just to know that there are other avenues that you can go down, like, do your own research, be curious. Like, I know Kelly Brogan's done some brilliant work in that space. She's was all about the medication, and it was a psychiatrist, but then has discovered other ways that you can help yourself. And med-free bipolar, she references a lot of her work. She also references GAPS, which is, I think it's gut and psychology syndrome or something, which is all about diet and gut health. But she says that's really helped her. But if my psychiatrist said, hey, these are your options for medication, you could also take lithium orotate, which is something you can buy at a health food store.
Right.
That's what med-free bipolar talks about. If lithium's been really helpful for you in the past and you don't want to go completely just SUPs, you can try that. And she said lithium orotate, it's a salt compound. It's actually helpful for people with ADHD, with people with anxiety, all sorts of other conditions. So if he had said to me, you could try this, or you could try an option, or look, read Kelly Brogan's book, or, maybe listen to this podcast, listen to these stories, like, just knowing that there was something outside of that sphere would have given me so much comfort and would have made me feel a lot less isolated.
Yeah.
And, these are stories of hope. They're stories of, like, an alternative, like, to the death sentence. Like, if I just knew there were other people out there, that would have been very comforting in a very sad and isolated time for me. And also, it was like the biggest ego death of my life. I sat at home crying on the couch a lot, going, I don't even know who I am anymore. Have I just been a mood episode up until this point? And it was like I had to then rebuild my entire sense of self, which took probably 2 years before I started to feel like, okay, I know who I am again. Because it was just like, a complete ego death, which we all know is heaps of fun.
Yeah, that's what they call it, spiritual emergence. It's like an awakening. I don't know who I am, and I've just gone through this medical crisis or health crisis, and I've come out the other side having to rediscover who I am. And what you've rediscovered about yourself is that you're fine, you're healthy and you're thriving, and that some of your depression and mood was because there was unresolved trauma from your childhood, and you've done the work. And look, you're a great example of what's possible when you're curious and open to exploring alternatives to traditional approaches to mental health.
Yeah. And just treat yourself like your own experiment. Like, just know that like one size doesn't fit all. And my story might not resonate, but part of it might. Or just try one little thing. Just check in with yourself and see how you're feeling. Like, you are the best judge. Like, no doctor knows your body more than you. You are the person that knows your body the most. You've been in it for your entire life.
Yeah.
And just to know that, like, you don't have to hand your power over to someone else. You can take that back.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. I think that we ought to see healthcare professionals not as healers, but as possibly partners in our healing. And then I think it's important that you choose a healthcare provider that you really feel comfortable and that you resonate with and that you have a rapport with. And because I think a big part of the healing comes from the quality of that relationship. So, is there more you'd like to share about your story, or you?
No, I think we've covered
Things.
things.
I do too. I really appreciate your time today and coming on this podcast to share your story. It's a really inspiring story. It's one that I really resonate with, and I hope that your story does make a difference for people who may hear this podcast, and just maybe they look at considering other options and look at alternatives. And again, they need to do that responsibly. If they're going to change their care plan, they need to do that in collaboration with their healthcare provider, but also take some agency over healing their condition.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story, and I hope that it does help a lot of people. And
that's your commitment, and I'm sure it will. So thank you for the gift of your story to others.
Thank you.
Yeah, so welcome.